Well, I want to welcome my EPPC colleague, Mary Hasson, to join us. Mary is the Kate O'Byrne Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center in Washington, D.C. She directs EPPC's Catholic Women's Forum and the Person and Identity Project, which is a great resource to equip parents and educators and other institutions on how to counter gender ideology. She was a keynote speaker for the Holy See at the UN's conference last year on the status of women. And just last week, she was one of the two expert witnesses who testified on our side of the Senate Judiciary hearing on the Equality Act. Mary is going to speak about the harms to women that the Equality Act would create. Thank you, Mary.
Thank you, Ryan. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to address the Equality Act's impact on females, women, and girls, and to speak to all of you here, because it's so important that all of us as Catholics understand what is at stake and take the knowledge from tonight and be willing to share that with all those we encounter. So the media has given a fair amount of coverage to the fact that the Equality Act jeopardizes women's athletics. And I'll address why it threatens girls and women's sports in a few moments. But I want to begin by pointing out that even without knowing much about the Equality Act, most Americans intuitively get the idea that it's unfair to give a biological male the right to compete in and dominate female athletic competitions simply because he identifies as a girl or a woman. He's not blocked, he's not barred from competing with the males. It's because of his identity, his self-perception that he seeks to compete with the females. From their own experience, the average person knows that there are striking differences in size, strength, and speed between most males and females, at least from puberty on. And we intuitively know it's just not fair to let males identify their way into female sports, because they will dominate and they will deprive girls of the opportunities that come with winning, the self-discipline, the achievement, the scholarships, even just making the team. I'll return to these points in a few moments, but I want to make a larger point first. The Equality Act will harm women in ways far more damaging than the losses that occur on the track, in the pool, or on the field. So if intuitively you understand that there's a problem with eliminating biological sex discrimination or distinctions in sports, be open to the fact that other aspects are far worse. And so I'll break the Equality Act's harm to women down into three categories. And I think it's a helpful way to think about it. The Equality Act compromises women's identity, our spaces, meaning our privacy and our safety, and our opportunities. First, identity. Central to our faith, supported by science, is the truth that the human person is created male or female, irrevocably so from the moment of conception. In biology, sex has a precise meaning, the organism's overall organization towards a reproductive role. Sexual reproduction in humans occurs only between males and females, and our entire body is organized right down to the cellular level to perform that reproductive role. We're either the kinds of persons whose bodies are organized to produce ova, or we're the kinds of persons whose bodies are organized to produce sperm. So we're immutably male or female from the moment of conception. This means that my identity is female. In Catholic terms, we understand our fundamental identity in an even deeper way, as a son or daughter of the Lord. But I'm female. I'm not a gender identity. I'm a woman because I'm a female. But the Equality Act goes where no federal law has gone before. It redefines sex in a way that amounts to erasing women. The Equality Act makes no reference to the biological distinctions between male and female, even though that was the traditional understanding of sex, both when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964 and over 50 years later, in 2020, just last year, when the Supreme Court decided the case Bostock versus Clayton County, which was an employment discrimination case, or a series of cases under Title VII. And in Bostock, although the court decided that discrimination because of sex would include discrimination because of sexual orientation or transgender status, it nevertheless noted that its decision assumed the definition of sex as biological distinctions between male and female. But under the Equality Act, is no such assumption. There is no reference to that biological distinction at all. Instead, the Equality Act defines sex to include the following: sex stereotypes, pregnancy, childbirth or related medical conditions, sex characteristics, which means body parts, and sexual orientation or gender identity. Gender identity means your identity, your self-perception, regardless of your sex. And the Equality Act says specifically, regardless of the individual's designated sex at birth. And so here's what we need to focus on in terms of identity. Sex matters. Only females go through puberty, get pregnant, give birth, breastfeed, and go through menopause. That's biology. No one can self-define into or out of biological reality. But under the Equality Act, the law will treat a female, an actual biological female, as legally indistinguishable from a male who identifies as a female, a male who has an inner sense that he somehow is a woman. This is the privileging of gender identity over biological sex. And it has another impact as well. It changes our language. So it shifts the common meaning of words to eliminate references to females in the female body. And if the Equality Act becomes law, these terms that refer to females, are suddenly going to be terms that could precipitate a law school. Are they a lawsuit? Are they sexual harassment? Are they implying something? Are they denying someone's gender identity? As a female, I nursed 7 children, a uniquely female bond and experience. Today, lactation consultants face political pressure to replace the term breastfeeding, which refers to the female experience of a mother feeding her child from her own breast, with the term chest feeding, which is defined as the process of feeding a child human milk from a person's chest. Mothers are gone, mothers are erased, females are erased. Imagine the pressure on our culture when the law deems sex-based terms such as breastfeeding as potentially discriminatory. When gender identity is privileged over biological sex, females are erased in law, language, and culture. For what does it mean to be a woman if anyone can self-define him or herself into that category? Under the Equality Act, being female is erased. Our existence is implied and reduced to nothing more than a designated label assigned at birth. My identity as female under the Equality Act would be dissolved in the acidic bucket of gender identity. The reality of my sexed body, my female experience, would be deemed less significant, less worthy of protection than a male who perceives himself to be a woman, whatever he imagines that might mean, regardless of his sex. So the Equality Act cements into law the ideological belief that identity is wholly self-defined, regardless of the sex body. And it suppresses the opposing belief, the reality that we're created male or female, and punishes those who would dissent, subjecting us to the risk of harassing lawsuits and judgments against us, or even just the chilling effect of not being free to be who we are, being branded implicitly with the scarlet letter B for bigot, because we're holding on to our beliefs. Second, the Equality Act eliminates the right of females to our own spaces, whether for privacy, fellowship, or safety. The Act specifically says the following, that with respect to gender identity, an individual shall not be denied access to a shared facility, including a restroom, a locker room, and a dressing room, if it's in accordance with the individual's gender identity. In other words, gender identity is the key that unlocks the door to female private spaces. So the law will forbid any public accommodation, a store, a restaurant, a public gathering space, a gym, homeless shelter, hospital rooms, from barring any male who identifies as a woman from entering these private spaces. In addition, the law also specifies that when, quote, sex is a bona fide occupational qualification, individuals are recognized in accordance with their gender identity. This means that jobs that may require intimate contact with a female body are open to any male who identifies as a woman. Think of passing through TSA and needing a pat down, or being in a theater or an airport restroom where the restroom attendants are typically female. All of those jobs then would be open to anyone who identifies as a female. The person your gym hires as a locker room attendant to hand you the towel as you're going in to shower, that is a position that would no longer be reserved to females. For young women on the cusp of their blooming womanhood, the Equality Act tells them their privacy doesn't matter. Indeed, lower court cases that challenged gender identity provisions in state and local public schools sent just this message. They denied schoolgirls the right to privacy, the right to their bathrooms, the right to their locker rooms, saying, as one court did, that it's not reasonable to be offended or to want privacy from a biological male who identifies as a girl. For women who are vulnerable, the costs are even higher. Patients in hospitals are an example. When gender identity is privileged over biological sex, that means hospitals are going to room in the women's section any male who identifies as a female. Women who are ill should not have to fear the loss of their privacy, dignity, or their safety by being forced to share a room with a male. Similarly, women who are incarcerated face increased threats. The state of Washington has already reported that there's a rise in male prisoners who are identifying as women and requesting to be moved to the female prison. We've seen the same thing, the same pattern in the UK, in Canada, where women prisoners are uniquely vulnerable to assault from these male, often sexual predators who will claim an identity as a woman and request to be transferred into those women's spaces. And again, women in shelters, domestic violence shelters, just as Robert mentioned. So finally, the third way in which women are harmed is through the loss of opportunities. And this is the one we're most familiar with. As I mentioned, biological males competing against biological females, we know what happens. Males tend to win. In fact, mediocre males can defeat the most talented female athletes. This is true at the high school sports level, as we've heard in Connecticut, where two transgender boys, two males who identified as girls, have swept more than a dozen titles, taking those spots, those accolades, scholarship potential away from the girls who have earned that. Well, that happens at the college level too. So the Equality Act threatens women's opportunities, certainly in sports, but in other ways as well. Women have long found that our ability to gather as females in women-only colleges, in girls' schools from K through grade 12, in sororities, in programs at work or special STEM programs that give women additional opportunities as women in order to help us advance. All of those things will be put at risk, subject to this category of gender identity, the privileging of gender identity over biological sex. Although US law already bans sex discrimination in education through Title IX, Title IX included careful distinctions that permitted single-sex dorms, religious colleges, fraternities, and sororities. All of that, again, would be put at risk. So by claiming gender identity as a protected category, this law would make it impossible legally to distinguish between a female and a biological male who claims to be a woman. The law thus tells us females that not only does our privacy not matter, but our safety doesn't matter either. Because of our biology, women are uniquely vulnerable to sexual assault. So when people ask you, why do you oppose the Equality Act? We can share from the heart that we care that people are treated fairly and that unjust discrimination is not permitted. But that's not what the Equality Act does. To the contrary, it treats civil rights as a zero-sum game, that in order to ensure no unjust discrimination for persons who identify as LGBT, the law must strip females, people of faith, from their civil rights, and for females, erasing our identity under the law, erasing our identity, erasing our spaces, and erasing our opportunities. So when the law privileges gender identity over biological sex, females lose. It's that simple.